Imagine you are 13 years old. You cannot go outside. You cannot speak above a whisper. You cannot flush the toilet during the day. You cannot walk across the floor without removing your shoes. And you cannot ever, not even once, open the curtains and let the sunlight touch your face. This was not a nightmare. This was real life, and it lasted for more than 2 years. But inside that dark and silent hiding place, a young girl picked up her pen and began to write. She wrote about fear. She wrote about hope. She wrote about growing up in the middle of a war. She wrote about what it means to be human. And those words, written in secret, written in darkness, would one day be read by millions of people all across the world. Her name was Anne Frank. This is not just a story about war. This is a story about a girl who refused to let hatred destroy her belief in goodness. A girl who turned her pain into purpose. A girl who never grew up, but whose voice never stopped growing. You will see how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. You will understand why one quiet voice matters more than 1,000 loud weapons. And you will learn something important about courage, kindness, and the power of words. And this story is also perfect for improving your English. Every sentence is written simply, clearly, and emotionally. You will feel the story in your heart, and you will build your English at the same time. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? What is the time in your country? I read every comment, and knowing you are here from all over the world makes this journey even more meaningful. Now, let's begin. Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. She was a small, lively girl with dark eyes that always seemed to be thinking. She laughed easily and talked constantly. Her teachers loved her energy, even when it got her into trouble. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and made it feel brighter. Her family was Jewish, but they were not strictly religious. They believed in education, in kindness, and in the idea that a person's character matters more than anything else. Her father, Otto Frank, was a quiet and thoughtful man who had served in World War I. He was gentle but strong. Anne adored him more than anyone in the world. Her mother, Edith, was more serious, more reserved. Anne and her mother often clashed. They were too different, and perhaps too similar, in ways neither of them understood at the time. Anne had one older sister, Margot. Where Anne was loud and restless, Margot was calm and careful. They were very different girls, but they loved each other. From a very young age, Anne wanted to be a writer. She kept notebooks. She wrote short stories. She wrote letters to imaginary friends. She was always reaching for words, trying to capture the world around her on paper. But the world around her was about to change forever. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany. The Nazis, his political party, began targeting Jewish people with cruel and systematic hatred. Laws were passed, rights were taken away. Jewish people were banned from schools, from businesses, from public spaces. They were forced to wear a yellow star on their clothes, a mark designed to separate them and shame them. Otto Frank saw the danger clearly. He was a man who read history, and he understood what was coming. In 1934, when Anne was just 5 years old, the family packed their belongings and moved to Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. They left behind their home, their friends, their familiar streets, everything. In Amsterdam, the Frank family tried to build a new life. Otto started a business selling ingredients for making jam and spices. The girls enrolled in school. Anne made friends quickly, as she always did. She fell in love with movies, with cycling through the city, with the rhythm of a normal childhood. For a few years, Amsterdam felt safe. Then, in May 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. Overnight, the danger the Frank family had fled from in Germany arrived again, this time at their front door. New laws came one by one, like a slow and terrible flood. Jewish children were removed from regular schools and placed in separate Jewish schools. Jewish families had to register their names with the authorities. Jewish people were banned from parks, from cinemas, from riding bicycles. The yellow star appeared again on coats and jackets. Anne was 12 years old. She watched her world become smaller, week by week. And then, one morning in July 1942, everything collapsed. On July 5th, 1942, a letter arrived at the Frank family home. It was addressed to Margot, Anne's 16-year-old sister. It was a call-up notice from the Nazi authorities. Margot was ordered to report for what the Nazis called a work camp in Germany. But everyone who received these letters knew the truth. These were not work camps. They were places people went to and did not come back from. Otto Frank looked at the letter. He looked at his daughters. He looked at his wife. And then he said 4 words that would change everything. We go into hiding. Just one day later, on the rainy morning of July 6th, 1942, the Frank family walked out of their apartment for the last time. They wore as many layers of clothing as they could. Carrying suitcases would have attracted attention. They left behind their furniture, their photographs, their pet cat. They left the front door open, as if they had simply stepped out for a walk. They never came back. Otto Frank had been preparing a hiding place for months. It was tucked inside his office building at 263 Prinsengracht, a canal-side street in Amsterdam. Behind a movable bookcase on the 3rd floor, a hidden door led to a small set of rooms. These rooms had no outdoor access, no sunlight, and almost no sound. They became known as the Secret Annex. Anne had just turned 13 years old. A few weeks before going into hiding, her parents had given her a gift for her birthday, a red and white checkered diary. She had named it Kitty. Inside the secret annex, that diary became her closest companion. The Frank family was not alone in hiding. 1 week after they arrived, another family joined them. Herman van Pels, who had worked with Otto, Auguste, his sharp-tongued wife, and Peter, their quiet, shy 16-year-old son. Later, a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer joined the group. 8 people now shared those cramped, airless rooms. Life in the annex followed strict and exhausting rules. From early morning until late afternoon, when the office workers were in the building below, absolute silence was required. No footsteps, no flushing the toilet, no moving chairs, no coughing too loudly. They sat still for hours at a time, reading, waiting, listening. Their food was brought to them by 4 brave Dutch employees who worked in Otto's office: Miep Gies, Jan Gies, Victor Kugler, and Johannes Kleiman. These 4 people risked their lives and the lives of their families every single day to keep the 8 people in the annex alive. They brought bread and potatoes and books and news from the outside world. Without them, the story would have ended in the very first week. In the evenings, when the building was empty, the 8 could move more freely. Still quiet, still careful, but at least able to stretch and breathe. And Anne wrote. Every day, sometimes twice a day, she filled the pages of her diary. She wrote about everything. She wrote about the arguments between the adults, which were frequent and loud. She wrote about her complicated feelings for Peter van Pels, whose quiet nature slowly became something she admired, then something she loved. She wrote about her frustration with her mother and her deep love for her father. She wrote about boredom, about hunger, about the distant sound of bombs falling on the city. But she also wrote about ideas, about the future, about who she wanted to become. I want to go on living even after my death, she wrote. That is why I am so grateful to God for having given me this gift of expressing all that is inside me. She read voraciously history, philosophy, mythology. She studied French and English and German. She rewrote and revised her diary entries, imagining that one day, after the war, people would read them as a book. In April 1944, Anne heard a radio broadcast from a Dutch government official who had escaped to London. He said that after the war, people should collect letters and diaries written during the occupation, documents that told the truth about what life under the Nazis had really been like. Anne heard those words, and she felt something light up inside her. She began rewriting her diary from the beginning, polishing it, shaping it, giving it a title. The Secret Annex. She was going to be a writer. She was certain of it. She was 15 years old and full of plans. Then, on the morning of August 4th, 1944, heavy boots climbed the stairs. The bookcase swung open, and it was over. Someone had betrayed them. To this day, no one knows exactly who made the call or why. But on that August morning, a Nazi officer named Karl Silberbauer led a group of officers into the building at 263 Prinsengracht. They found the hidden door. They found all 8 people inside. Anne's diary pages scattered across the floor. Miep Gies, who was in the office downstairs when the arrest happened, later crept upstairs. She gathered Anne's papers, the loose diary entries, the notebooks, the rewritten pages, and she locked them in her desk drawer. She could not bring herself to read them. She kept them safe, hoping that one day she would be able to return them to Anne herself. That day would never come. The 8 people from the annex were taken first to a holding prison, then to Westerbork, a transit camp in the north of the Netherlands. At Westerbork, they were classified as criminal Jews because they had tried to hide, which meant they were given the hardest labor. Anne carried heavy stones. Margot moved wet mattresses crawling with lice. The rooms were overcrowded, the food was barely edible, and the fear of what came next was constant. On September 3rd, 1944, their names appeared on a transport list. They were loaded onto a cattle train, the very last transport train to leave Westerbork. More than 1,000 people were packed into freight wagons with no seats, no food, no light, and barely any air. The doors were sealed. The train moved. 3 days later, it arrived at Auschwitz. At the platform, SS guards with dogs directed the arriving prisoners left and right. Left meant forced labor. Right meant the gas chambers. The elderly, the very young. And the sick went right. The others went left. That night on the platform, the Frank family was separated for the last time. Otto was taken to the men's camp. Anne, Margot, and their mother, Edith, were taken to the women's camp. It was the last time Anne ever saw her father. At Auschwitz, the women's heads were shaved. They were given thin, striped uniforms. They were tattooed with numbers. They woke at 4 a.m. They stood in roll call for hours in the cold. They worked. They were given black water that was supposed to be coffee and a small piece of hard bread. Every day was a study in how much a human being can endure. Anne's mother, Edith, began to fall apart. She gave her bread to her daughters. She gave her scarf to keep Margot warm. She slept on the cold floor without blankets, so the girls could have a little more comfort. She stopped eating. In January 1945, just weeks before Russian soldiers liberated Auschwitz, Edith Frank died of starvation and exhaustion. Anne and Margot never had the chance to say goodbye. In late October 1944, as the Allied forces closed in from the west, the Nazis began moving prisoners away from the front lines. Anne and Margot were transferred to Bergen-Belsen, a camp in northern Germany. Bergen-Belsen had no gas chambers. But people died there every hour anyway. There was no running water, no functioning toilets. Thousands of unburied bodies lay across the camp grounds. Disease spread through the barracks like wildfire. Typhus, a terrible fever spread by lice, was killing people faster than the guards could count. Anne and Margot were covered in lice. Their skin was infected. They were burning with fever and shaking with cold. They had no strength left to stand. One morning, Margot fell from her bunk. She was too weak to get up. Within days, she was gone. Anne Frank had now lost her mother, her sister, and, though she did not know it, her home and her diary. She had nothing left. Just days after Margot died, in late February or early March of 1945, Anne Frank died too. The official cause was typhus. She was 15 years old. She did not know that the British Army would liberate Bergen-Belsen just 6 weeks later, on April 15th, 1945. She did not know that the war in Europe would end in May. She did not know that her father was alive. She died, believing she was completely alone. Her body was placed in a mass grave. No name, no stone, no ceremony, but her words were still alive. Of the 8 people who hid in the Secret Annex, only one survived. Otto Frank. He was liberated from Auschwitz by Soviet soldiers in January 1945. He made his way back to Amsterdam slowly, traveling across a broken and exhausted Europe. He returned to the city where his family had tried to build a life. He waited. He asked at refugee centers and information offices. He wrote letters, he hoped, and then, one by one, the names came back to him. Edith, gone. Margot, gone. Anne, gone. Otto Frank later said that reading the news of his daughter's deaths was the most terrible moment of his life, not because he had not feared it. He had feared it every day in the camp. But because the last small flame of hope finally went out. Then, one afternoon, Miep Gies came to him. She placed a bundle of papers on his desk. She said quietly, "These are Anne's." Otto could not open the bundle at first. It sat on his desk for days. But one morning, he began to read. And page by page, he met his daughter again. Not the girl he had known, but someone deeper, someone wiser, someone extraordinary. He read the line that stopped him completely. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. His daughter had written those words while hiding from people who were trying to kill her. She had written them while listening to news of massacres and deportations. She had written them while hunger and fear and silence pressed down on her every day, and she still believed in the goodness of people. Otto understood then that this diary could not remain private. It belonged to the world. He spent years carefully preparing the diary for publication, removing a few very personal passages, combining different versions Anne had written. He worked to preserve her voice exactly as it was, young, honest, searching, alive. In 1947, the diary was published in Dutch under the title Het Achterhuis, The Secret Annex. The first printing was small, but the readers who found it could not put it down. Within years, it was translated into English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, and dozens of other languages. Eventually, it would be translated into more than 70 languages. It has sold more than 30 million copies. It is one of the most widely read books in human history. Anne Frank never became a writer in the way she had imagined. Touring bookshops, giving interviews, seeing her name on a cover in a shop window. But she became something more enduring than that. She became a voice. Today, the building at 263 Prinsengracht stands exactly as it was. The hidden bookcase is still there. The rooms are still, small, and dark. Visitors come from every country in the world to walk through them, slowly, quietly. The way you might walk through a church or a forest. They come not just to understand history, they come to feel it. On the wall of Anne's room in the annex, you can still see the photographs she pinned up. Movie stars, European royalty, pictures she loved. She was a teenage girl. She had dreams that were ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. She wanted to fall in love. She wanted to travel. She wanted to write books and have people read them and feel something. She got the last part. She got it more than she could ever have imagined. I want to go on living even after my death. She does. Anne wrote in secret, in hiding, with no certainty that anyone would ever read her words. She wrote anyway. She wrote as if the future were listening. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect audience. Write, speak, create. Your truth matters, and truth lasts. Miep Gies was not a soldier or a politician. She was a secretary. But she chose, every day for 2 years, to bring food and hope to 8 people hiding behind a bookcase. She risked her life for kindness. Courage does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like showing up quietly and doing the right thing when no one is watching. The persecution of Jewish people under the Nazis did not begin with camps. It began with words, with laws, with small acts of separation that seemed, one by one, almost manageable, until it was too late. Pay attention to the small injustices. Speak when others stay silent. The time to resist is always earlier than we think. Anne had no outdoor access, no friends outside the annex, no future she could be certain of. But inside those walls her intellect grew. She read, studied, revised, and dreamed. No one could take her inner life from her. Circumstances can limit your body. They cannot limit your mind unless you allow them to. Anne lost friends, family members, and her entire world while in hiding. She grieved deeply. But she also continued to hope, not blindly, but with intention. She chose to believe in good people even while surrounded by evidence of terrible ones. Hope is not the absence of pain. It is the decision to keep moving forward in spite of it. Anne's relationship with her father gave her the confidence to think freely and write honestly. Her relationship with her mother, complicated and frustrating, also shaped her, pushing her to examine herself deeply. Even Peter van Pels, quiet and uncertain, gave her warmth when warmth was hardest to find. Our relationships, even the difficult ones, build us. Pay attention to who you are becoming in connection with others. Anne Frank did not survive the Holocaust, but the act of remembering her, reading her diary, visiting her hiding place, speaking her name, is a refusal to let hatred have the final word. Remember her not only with sadness, remember her with action. Be kinder than the world asks you to be. Be braver than you think you can. That is how Anne Frank wins. Anne Frank died at 15 years old in a camp full of cold and silence and disease. She never saw the end of the war. She never knew her diary survived. She never knew that her father made it home. She never knew that millions of people, children, teachers, grandparents, survivors, readers in countries she had never heard of, would one day open her words and feel less alone. She was just a girl, a curious, talkative, big dreaming girl who wanted to write books and see the world and fall in love and live. She didn't get to live, but she never stopped believing, even in the darkest place, that the world was still worth believing in. And that belief, written in ink, survived everything the world threw at it. Every time someone opens her diary, Anne Frank is alive again. Every time someone chooses kindness over hatred, Anne Frank wins. Every time someone speaks when it would be easier to stay silent, Anne Frank is honored. She asked to live on after her death, and she does. She does every single day. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I really want to know your answer. Anne Frank spent over 2 years in hiding. She could not go outside. She could not speak freely. She could not live as herself in the open world. But every single day, she chose to write. She chose to hope. If you were in her position, locked in silence, with no certainty of survival, what is the one thing you would write about to keep your spirit alive? Tell me in the comments. I will read every single one. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think or feel or see the world a little differently, please give this video a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. And if you want to keep learning English through powerful, true, and unforgettable human stories, so subscribe to Woven English. We have many more stories waiting for you. Stories about courage, about loss, about people who changed the world not with weapons, but with words. Thank you so much for being here today. You are not just learning English. You are learning what it means to be human. This is Woven English, and we will see you in the next story. Take care of each other.